Well, kia ora tātou, everybody. Bruce Harrell's my name. I'm the director of the Goodfellow Unit, which is, for those of you who aren't regulars on our webinars, is a continuing education unit in the University of Auckland, supported by the Goodfellow family. We do continuing education for mainly primary care health professionals. But tonight we've got a slightly different item on the menu. We're going to be talking about retirement, and I have a little joke that if you're over the age of 20, you should be thinking about retirement, because it's an important issue. If you wait till you're 63, it's a bit too late. So the evening is being sponsored by Medical Assurance. They haven't directed us to say anything. We're not going to talk particularly about money, but of course they do money. Tim, who's our lawyer here tonight, I'll introduce in a moment, and myself have insurance with Medical Assurance, but as I say, we've been free and free to say what we want. So I'll just introduce our speakers. So from Sydney in Australia, we've got Peter Graham, who is a retirement coach. So welcome, Peter, and we're looking forward to your talk tonight. We've got Moru Gia, who's representing the engineers. So we've got engineers tonight, which is a first for us. She's a geotechnical and infrastructure engineer. So welcome, Moru.
Thank you.
And then there's Tim Mahud, who is a lawyer who's interested in software and intellectual property, and he's passionate about law. So that's fantastic. The way this came about was I was listening to a podcast called Better Thinking. It's done by an Australian psychologist called Nish Nikolic, who's based in Canberra, who I met over there a couple of years ago. And so I got onto his podcast. And there was this one on retirement. I thought, let's have a listen to it. And I was absolutely intrigued by what Peter said. And the thing that got me was he said there's 60 things you need to know about retirement. Money's one of them. And of course, if you go to anything about retirement, it seems to all be about money and not about the other things. So Peter's going to talk tonight about mostly the other issues. And he's got some advice on financial stuff too, but that's but mainly about the other things you have to do getting on with your life. So I've put in the chat box there, you can get the link to that podcast if you want to hear it, but I think you're going to hear most of what Peter had to say there. The other thing is Peter runs face-to-face courses, and we're going to be getting them across from Australia later in this year. We're hoping the engineers may want to host him along with the lawyers. He certainly will get him to see the doctors. And he has a little booklet that he works through. So he does it in groups of about 30 to 40. So we're looking forward to getting him across the Tasman. So Peter, welcome to our webinar. Welcome to New Zealand. And we're delighted you've been willing to join us tonight. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce. I really enjoy this opportunity, and it's nice to have Maru and Paul along as well from other professions. Now, my aim in the time available is to give you a brief comment on the many areas of financial planning that you might need to know about. Now, as a financial planner of 50 years, I noticed that most people had no idea what to do in retirement. For many people, retirement is about doing nothing, and it is, until you realize that it's not. So tonight it's just going to be a brief introduction to this important subject, but I want to remind you of what was quoted many years ago by a guy by the name of Calderwood. And he said, get the important things right. And nothing could be closer to the truth than that when it comes to retirement. Firstly, as Bruce mentioned, it's not about money. You need money, but it's not about money. All that money ever does is to give you options which you may adopt. And it's more than just a financial plan. It's about living a full and meaningful life. Yes, it's about lifestyle. So the question is, how are you going to fill in the time? I happen to know, because of my experience in doing this work, that it is possible to have an extraordinary retirement. Of course, we'll all make mistakes at times, but the biggest mistake is not to try to have a fantastic retirement. And sadly, too many people, when faced with the choice between changing their mind and defending their position, most people get busy defending their position. And we must avoid this trap. What is needed is flexible thinking on all of the issues. Now, as Bruce said, 60 issues to think about. One's money, but the others are lifestyle issues. And another principle that we should remember is that we must not fool ourselves, and we are the easiest people to fool. Now, the big issue is this. You may well live 30 years. Now, that's a long time in retirement by any measure. Not everyone will, of course, but you may live 30 years. Now, birth, the life expectancy from birth is 83.6 years. But of course, the older you are, the longer you are likely to live. Now, I give a lot of presentations, not only in Australia, but around the world. And when I mention retirement, I ask people to tell me what is the one word that comes into their mind. Lots of answers, I've got to tell you, but 57% have said exactly the same thing. I'm bored. Now, I don't quite understand that, but when you're bored, it could mean that you become boring. And the loss of social contact is a huge issue. And this can lead to loneliness, depression, and cognitive decline. Now, back to the 30 years that I mentioned. 30 years equals 11,000 days. Or put another way, you're going to have maybe 176,000 waking hours. Now, taking out shopping and other essentials of, say, 2 hours a day, that's 154,000 hours that you are going to have to fill in. But what do people do these days with their time in retirement? Now, this will come as a surprise, but the biggest issue is screen time. Watching or being distracted by or influenced by television, your telephone, tablet, computers. The average consumption is 9 hours a day of television, etc. And over a lifetime, that's 99,000 hours that you would spend watching television and screen time. Or another way, 68% of your time will be spent doing that. And you may well ask, well, what's the purpose in doing that? Not one person has been able to tell me what they've been able to learn or what they benefit from by watching television. In fact, we don't learn from television at all. If we did, we'd have a much smarter community than we have. Now, the children of retirees tell me that I'm wrong, that it's more like 15 hours a day. Now, that's maybe them, but the average is certainly 9 hours a day. And so your question is, what are you going to do to fill in your time? Now, the very first thing that we need to think about is preparation. We need to think, dream, and discuss our plans. We need to work out a general working of how we might retirement. And just remember, your preparation and application of all your time will eventually be observed as you live through retirement life. Sadly, most people spend more time planning a holiday than they do in planning 30 years of retirement.
So, Pete, sorry, Peter, yeah, sure. I'm a trial lawyer primarily, and so I spend, kind of, you have your trial, which is, kind of say it's a 5-day trial, you'll spend at least 5 days or possibly longer preparing for that, right? So I guess the question is, when do you need to start planning for this? I mean, putting aside the financial things, but when do you need to start planning for everything else that goes along that? Do you need to, is it your 30 years and then taking it back 30 years as well? Or, I mean, it's kind of like a last minute, sort of like 18 months going to be enough?
Well, it's interesting, but my target market that I generally talk to are people who are 50 plus and still working. Now, still working is really important because that time gives you enough time to do all the planning and to get the habits developed so that you have a fabulous retirement. And the people who leave it to the last minute, they really struggle. I must say they struggle, because what happens generally is that people who aren't prepared will arrive home after they've stopped work and think, now, let's see, what do I have to do? I'll just sit down and watch a bit of television while I'm thinking about it. And that's it. That's it. That's what happened. People generally, if they don't do the planning well in advance, they don't do it at all. And that's the really sad thing about it. Now, in retirement, we need a purpose. To have a great retirement, that is. And it's critical that we work out what is our purpose in retirement, because this gives meaning to retirement. So what is purpose? Well, it's not, I never miss the nightly news or Bravo or on Discovery. It's not, I have the best lawn in New Zealand. But instead, let's try, I'll create a charity for those who are chronically ill, or I'll coach and mentor students in whatever topic you are experienced in, or I'll follow my passion as a beekeeper. We need a purpose that really drives your retirement. For example, mine is doing what I'm doing now. I'm 77, too young to retire, and thoroughly enjoying what I am doing. I wonder where the time goes to, because I'm having so much fun in what I'm doing. And so we need to work out what is going to be our aim and our goal and our intention, because if you're going to have any form of decent retirement, you must have a purpose. You must have a dream to follow. And the way to do that is very simple. Now, we all remember Captain Cook floating around the Pacific. Oh, I don't remember him doing it, but 240 years ago, he was floating around the Pacific, and every day he'd get up on his deck and he'd look around a 360-degree of horizon, and he'd ask himself 4 questions. Where am I now? Where do I want to be? What are the best options? And which is the best? You must ask those questions of yourself regularly as you're going through retirement, so that it keeps improving, not the same old, same old, same old. So it's a great habit to acquire, and it's really important to do it. Now, we've all heard of goals and targets, and you and I have been setting goals and targets for years, in fact, every day. And it's as simple as a shopping list up to a formal set of goals. And as Tony Robbins has said, I want you to open up your mind and then design yourself. And that's a good way of doing it. I'd like to ask you this simple question. What is the most important issue to you right now? Is it a good night's sleep, or the dinner you're waiting for, or maybe television, planning tomorrow's issues, family, or holidays? Well, I'm sorry that if you've mentioned any of those, it's incorrect, because the most important thing to you and to me is our next breath. Without that, we can forget about everything else. Now, we all know that health is wealth. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this issue, because there's quite a few doctors involved in this particular discussion. There's a few really big issues that people need to think about. Now, when I'm giving my talks, I often say to the group, when I'm talking about heart issues, I talk about sudden death syndrome is very hard to treat. Now that gets people's attention, but sadly, far too many people do not take these issues seriously. It's like diabetes. People do not take this seriously. They might have diabetes or developing diabetes in some way, but they somehow want to ignore the fact that other issues are exacerbated by diabetes. They just ignore that. Another question I ask people is there anyone out there that would like to have a stroke? Now, you can imagine the reaction of people when I say that. But it's really important that people understand that these are issues which you might be experiencing in retirement. We should know about them. We should know what to do in certain circumstances and how to do it, like a fit or other first aid issues or a fall. If people have a fall, what do they do? And it's okay for, say, the doctors to know what to do, but have you told your partner? If you have a fall and can't get up, what can they do about it? So it's really important that these issues are passed on, are mentioned to other people. Now, dementia is another big one as we get older. The most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. And dementia, for the non-medical people, it's a collection of symptoms that causes disorders affecting the brain. Now, dementia is a big issue when it comes to retirement because it's very, very common. Another very common one is depression. And depression doubles the risk of cognitive impairment in women and quadruples it in men. That's depression. If you get depressed, you've got a good chance of having a problem down the track. I've been reading a book, a very interesting book called Lost Connection by Johann Hart. And it's about depression and finding hope. And he's worked out that depression, as far as he's concerned, comes from lack of meaningful work, disconnection with other people, disconnection of meaningful values, a disconnection from childhood trauma, and a disconnection from the natural world that's living in these big cities, etc. A disconnection from hope and a secure future, and other brain changes. Now, these are big issues, and they're things that we should be thinking of as much as possible. But the big one that I've worked on is understanding cognitive decline. I was asked to give a talk to a group of retirees, and I said to the organizer, what would you like me to talk about? And they said, oh, I don't know, you work it out. Well, I sat down and I thought about it. I am going to give a talk on something that I know nothing about. And then I spent 2 weeks learning enough about this topic to talk about it. Now, I don't know anywhere near as much as a doctor, and I accept that. But it's really interesting to pass on the information about cognitive decline, because it's the great fear in retirement that people will have cognitive decline. Now, I know the statistics are not all that huge, but they are enough to frighten people. And I remember talking to an ex-client of mine, and Rosemary was chatting to me about retirement. And I said to her, Rosemary, what's the one thing that you fear in retirement? And she said, oh dear, I'm just, losing my mind. Cognitive decline worries me. And I said, does it worry you much? Oh yes, it's a huge issue. And I said, well, do you know what to do that might help you delay it? You can't avoid it, but to delay it? No, what do I have to do? I said, well, 46 universities throughout the world have been studying aging. And they have worked out that there is one thing that you can do to help slow down cognitive decline. You can't avoid it. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it, but you can delay it. Oh, she said, what's that? And I said, exercise. Oh, no, she said, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not interested. And that's the problem. People just don't take these issues seriously. Think it's important, but unfortunately, they don't do anything about it. And let me just tell you that the risk factors that are modifiable as far as cognitive decline are concerned are diabetes, midlife obesity, smoking, depression, cognitive inactivities through educational attainment, midlife hypertension, and physical activity. And one of the things that Professor Ross Andel told me, he's from the University of Southern Florida, he said, look, exercise has been worked out as the only option that they know about that can help slow down Alzheimer's. If you're going to get it, you can do this and it'll slow it down. And that is such as walking as though you're in a hurry. You must do housekeeping enthusiastically, car washing quickly, dancing, taking stairs, not the lift. Another issue, interestingly, about medicine, there are a couple of changes that are going on at the moment. I was listening to a very good friend of mine, Ross Walker, over here. He's a cardiologist and an exceptional promoter of health issues. And he was talking about this wonderful thing called micropatching, which is coming out. And then there's immunotherapy, and boy, do I know about immunotherapy. And it's an extraordinary thing that's happening. But the sad thing that happens, I believe, is too many people feel that if they get sick, they go to the doctor and the doctor can sort it out. Now, life's not like that, unfortunately. And so people need to seriously get involved in solving problems as far as their health is concerned. And the easiest one we can do is following the American Heart Foundation, who recommends that we get involved in doing 10,000 steps a day. Now, I started doing that. In fact, I've been doing it for many, many, many years. But being an overachiever, that wasn't enough. I thought, oh, I'll make it 11,000. Then I thought, well, if I can make it 11, I can make it 12. And then I looked at it and I thought, hang on. If I made it 13,000 steps a day, that's 10 kilometres a day. I can remember that. And so I walk 10 kilometres a day and have been doing it for years and years and years. And there's a couple of minor benefits in that. You lose weight, you sleep better, your brain works better, your bloods are better, and the sugars are better, and so on and so forth. And so walking is a really important part to get involved in. I get up every morning and I go for a walk and I catch up with all the other people who are out walking. Now, before COVID-19, not many people were there. Since COVID-19, more and more people are out there walking and walking and walking. And a lot of them bought dogs and now they've got to look after the dog, and so they take them for a walk. But if you need to be encouraged how to do a lot of walking, a dog is one way of doing it, but I would encourage people to really get involved in this idea of walking. Now, one of the other issues that I'd like to discuss is something which drives our lives every day. Every single day, we are influenced by habits. They run our lives, and we all have many, many habits, from either waking up or how we drive or how we save or what we exercise we do, or even how we think. Habits are therefore the first point of change for any of us, changing our habits and improving them. And I'd suggest that developing a habit for retirement preparation is one that you can do right now, from today onwards. And working on habits which you have, which need to be improved, changed, or created, is critical for your success. For example, I get up at 5:55 in the morning. Now that may be late for some people, it may be very early for some people, but the interesting part is that there are people out there that don't know that there are two 5:55s on the clock. They only know about the one at night time. They don't know about the one in the morning. Now, the reason I chose 5:55 is because I used to always get up at 7 o'clock. And I was convinced by a psychologist that if you can learn to get up at 5:55 in the morning, it teaches you discipline, and it's the discipline that will make a difference. For example, a lot of people hit the snooze button in the morning. What that's saying is that you are actually telling yourself that your targets and goals are not that important. Another habit that I've developed is occasionally you don't want to do something. You don't want to stop watching television, or you don't want to even get out of bed, or you don't want to start a project or whatever else. And I have learned that the trick for me, and there are many tricks, but the trick for me is to start the process of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you start doing it. And how you start doing it is you move. You just get up. Once you get up, you are a different person, and you are better able to handle the day-to-day issues or the challenges that you have. The hard part is getting moving, and that is something which people need to do. I'd like to move on to probably, I believe, one of the easiest yet most important things in retirement. As we get older, we end up having fewer and fewer friends. They move, they retire to another area, they change houses, they go to a facility, or they die, or whatever the case may be, but our circle of friends gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's a problem, because if we don't continue to expand our circle of friends, we will end up talking more and more and more to fewer and fewer people about the same old stuff. And that is boring. That is uninteresting, and you will lose friends as a result of it. So I would suggest to you that developing the skill of meeting more and more people is important for what you do. I remember as I was at a meeting once, and one lady stood up and said, "Excuse me, I don't like meeting people I don't know." I thought about it for a second. I said, "Do you know anyone?" And she said, "Of course I do." And then comes the question, did you know them before you knew them? And the answer is, of course, you didn't know them. And the only way that you are ever going to expand your circle of friends is to meet new people. And you've got to do it on a regular basis. And now, ladies and gentlemen, is the time to start. Don't leave it until you're my age, for example, to suddenly decide that you're going to meet more people. It's a habit that you've got to get into so that you do not run out of friends when you get older. For example, what are they called? I can't think. The healthy zones of the world have people who have a large circle of friends, and it's not their family. These are friends that they have developed over time. Now, I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand, but I can go down the road any day and there's a group of men sitting around. They're usually Italians or Greeks or Spanish or whatever the case may be. And they're chatting and chatting and chatting and chatting. That's what I mean. We've got to make certain that we continue to stay in touch with people on a regular basis. as often as we possibly can. For example, I have a contact list. Now, okay, I think you need that type of thing. In other words, list down your friends and just make certain that you are actually staying in touch with them. Now, far too often people say, well, I'm not going to talk to them. They don't ring me. Why would I talk to them? That's the point. There is one person in every relationship that drives the relationship. And I'm suggesting that you become the person who is driving the relationship when it comes to friendships. It's really important to do that. And if you've got friends that are sick or lonely or elderly or disabled or whatever the case may be, give them special treatment. Contact them. I remember years ago, I was settling a disablement claim for someone who had a bad cancer. And I went to Anne and I called up with her, and she had breast cancer. And it was very, very bad. But anyway, we pulled all the paperwork out. And then I asked her a question which I'm sure nobody else has ever asked her. I said, Anne, what is the worst part about getting breast cancer? Oh, she said, that's easy. You are abandoned by your friends. Now that troubled me. I went away and I worked out how I was going to stay in touch with my friends that had had disadvantage in their life. And it wasn't until I got breast cancer that I realised how true it was. The statement was absolutely true. You are abandoned by your friends. Oh, I don't want to talk to them maybe the wrong time, or what will I say, or I don't want to embarrass them, or I might ask the wrong question. That goes on. People think of any excuse. My suggestion to you is that you don't use excuses. You just ring them up and you just say, g'day, how's it going? You've got any questions? Anything you'd like to talk about? What can I do for you? Whatever the case may be. Now, I do that regularly with my people, my friends that have had some form of disablement or illness or a sad event in their life. And to a person, they say to me, I am the only person who rings them to discuss these matters. So I would encourage you when it comes to friendships that you not only expand them, but you also stay in touch with people and give special mention to people who are unwell. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but I can assure you that when you start doing that, it is really, really good to do it. For example, as you know, I get up in the morning and I go for a walk every morning, and I always talk to the people who have dogs. Why? Because they're the easiest people to talk to. For example, every dog I come across, I call them Killer. Hello, Killer. Well, the dog hasn't got a clue what I'm saying, but it sure understands what I'm saying. And it stops and its tail wagging and it's happy and so on and so forth. And then I talk to the person with the dog. So I get used to talking to a lot of people a lot of times. Now, it's not that I want every one of these to become very, very close friends of mine, but let me assure you that if you can get into the habit of doing this type of thing, when you do come across people that you want to be friends with, or you want to maintain your friendship, having practiced talking to people on a regular basis makes it a lot easier to do it. And I'd encourage you to talk to as many people as possible. Years ago, I was in Chicago, and I was with a friend of mine. He was a psychologist, and we're standing at a street light, and he said, Peter, he said, what's your biggest problem? And I said, well, to tell you the truth, Aaron, I am really shy. I am chronically shy. I am just absolutely terrified of talking to people. And he said, do you want to solve the problem? I said, yeah. Well, 10 minutes. It took him 10 minutes to train me how to talk to every single person. and I've been doing it ever since. You see, the problem is this. People do not know how to start a conversation if they don't know you. They just do not how to get the thing started. You get it started and they'll talk for ages. So the responsibility that we have to develop more friendships is to learn how to create conversation with people. And that is done by asking interesting questions. The next time you see someone, please don't do what most people do. Hello, Jim, how are you? Good. Well, that was brilliant, wasn't it? You got absolutely nowhere in doing that. So we've got to learn to ask the right question. And the wisdom's in the question, not in the answer. The wisdom's in the question, because if we can learn to ask the right questions, we have a chance, just a chance of getting the right answer. But if we don't ask the right question, it doesn't really matter what answer you get at all. Yes, Bruce.
Peter, one of the things I say to people, I do it myself socially, and I do it for my patients who've got social anxiety, is that when you meet somebody you vaguely know, is you say, what have you been up to lately? And that gets them going. And I had a patient who used to go to a social anxiety group, and I sort of said, well, how the hell does that work? You know, he says, well, starting conversations is difficult. And I said, well, try this. And he's found it absolutely fabulous. It sort of opened up the group and gets people talking about themselves. And then you find something and you can duck in and come into it. Have you got any other tips? Well, the other thing I was going to say, Peter, people can start, there's a chat function here down to the right hand. If you've got a question, either for Peter, Mauro, Tim, or myself, then fire away, because we're getting ready to take questions now.
Okay, well, another thing I would suggest that people consider doing is to belong to what I call a collaborative group. Now, I belong to 3 of them, and these are people that I would not normally associate with. In Melbourne, I belong to a group called the Blokes Night Out, and that's where all these guys get together. Now, much to the surprise of females, I'm sure, males don't talk about these things. They don't talk much about themselves, especially about the serious issues. So the Blokes Night Out is a time when people from all walks of life can get together. Maybe 25 turn up on a night, or 6 or 17, it doesn't matter. And we start talking, and all of a sudden somebody will start talking about a topic, and that becomes the topic of the night. And it's really interesting what can happen. For example, I can remember one night where we're going around the room, having our little, what we call Wigo, what is going on. And we were explaining what's been happening in our lives. And we got round the other side, and one of the guys said, hey, Barry, come on. He was a urologist. And he said, Barry said, hey, come on, your turn to get going, Barry. Now, tell us about erectile dysfunction. And of course, we all laughed. Guess what we spoke about? These guys don't do that. We do not sit down and talk about issues females do. They talk about it all the time, all the problems that they're having, etc. Men don't do that. And so the collaborative groups in this one example, for example, the Blokes Not Out, all of a sudden we're talking about things that we would never talk about. On another occasion, we spoke about gambling. Now, we have a professional gambler in the group, and he was telling us all about what he does and how it works. I didn't know anything about that, but I do now. And then we had another guy. He was a Muslim guy in the group. Now, we've already got Jews in the group. We've got 2 Muslims as well. And the Muslims started talking about Hamas and what goes on, much to everyone's surprise. The point about a collaborative group, you will talk about subjects that you would not normally talk about. And that is very good for this thing up here. And it is very good to expand your friendships. Now, I've got a business group in Sydney, and I've got another group in Canberra that I go to. The collaborative groups are a great way to meet people and to continue the learning process. That help, Bruce?
Yeah, no, what I was going to say is like sometimes when people are new to town and they're looking to make friends, particularly if they like reading books, I suggest they maybe start a book club in the neighborhood. You know, just invite a few people. And, you know, again, I think that collaborative group is a really good idea. So we haven't got any questions at the moment, but I was just going to ask, Moru, would you like to ask some questions that you think we should be asking?
Yes, absolutely. Along the way, while Peter and yourself were talking, I've actually written down quite a few things. Just going back to what both of you mentioned about making friends or joining these groups, because initially, Peter, when you were describing some of the hints and tips about making friends, and I thought, typically I would think you make the friends the way because you are all sharing a common interest. So hence what Bruce, you mentioned about joining these groups and if you're moving to a new place. But what you, Peter, mentioned is basically rather than sharing a common interest, it seems to be just more open and collaborative environment. Do these type of platform become more and more available also in New Zealand, for example? I haven't actually started to explore things like this.
Well, I believe there's something, Maury, that you have to create. You have to get out there and start these issues, and you have to set a few rules and get people who are interested in what's going on, because the best people you can ever get to know are interesting and interested. And they're the people that you need in the group, interesting and interested. And they'll start talking about, I mean, you're a lawyer. It's a mystery to most people what you guys do, a total mystery. But it's really interesting for you to explain to people what goes on. I mean, all we know is you take the work away and somehow it gets done and we get this bloody big bill at the end of it and all the rest of it. We know that.
But our specialty.
Let me explain to you, in the collaborative group, when the lawyers and the doctors and everything will start talking about what they're doing and how they're doing, it completes the education just that little bit extra, and we begin to understand what others are doing, and it really is quite fascinating to do that. Good question, Maureen. Yeah.
And also you mentioned about diseases. So I have been, I'm nowhere close to a medical expert. So I have been Googling a few things in the past few days, but just randomly. So some people suggest that aging is a disease that people are currently finding the cure for, or trying to find the root cause. So Peter, what do you say to the people that typically use the excuse of my physical health is declining, I'm not used to do the things that I used to be able to do or enjoy very much in my younger days, and people could see the difference. Some people say 30 is the mark, you see your metabolism change, and then 50 is another mark where you see your general energy level just changes completely from back when you were 40s, for example. What is the recommendation that you could give to those people who generally feel these type of things? And not to mention, some people decide to keep on working after the age of 65, and some people decide to retire early. But I think that the physical condition seems to be the common topic.
Well, I think people, strangely enough, I mean, I don't tell people this because, you know, I don't need the argument. But what I do observe is that most people who are struggling put it on themselves. They sit around and do nothing. They don't exercise. They don't eat properly. That goes, all these types of things add up, as doctors will tell you. It adds up, and it turns out to be a result down the track. And so we've all got to be very careful about those issues which might develop into a problem such as you were talking about. You know, for example, I walk and I've got, as most people do at my age, some form of arthritis. I've got a big toe. I keep walking. That's that attitude is different. Most people go and have it treated, and I don't. I had a sore knee, and I rang my physiotherapist, and he said, well, what are you going to do about it? And I said, I know, I thought I might come and see you. He said, don't do that, just walk it out. And I did. And I think that a lot of people have brought about the problems themselves, not always, but they bring it about themselves, and they have to actually understand that life is a personal responsibility. So is retirement. Health is a personal responsibility. Education is a personal responsibility. Every single thing that we do is a personal responsibility. Those of us that do that treat life differently. And I think it's important that people need to understand that you've got to start early. You don't suddenly start, oh, I better get fit, and you're 80 years of age. You can't do that. You've got to do it all beforehand.
One of the narratives I use for exercising, Peter, and I think I mentioned it to you when we were talking, this comes from Kelly McGonigal, who's a health psychologist at Stanford. She wrote a book about stress and a book about the joy of movement. Your muscles are endocrine factories that when you exercise them, they create hope chemicals in your brain. So exercising is a way of getting hope chemicals in your brain. And that's how I sell exercise to my patients. I say, I think you need a few hope chemicals. The quickest way to get them is to start exercising. And we know for low mood and people who, I see a lot of people who get stuck is the word I use rather than depressed or anxious. And inevitably they're unfit and inevitably they're not catching up with their friends. So the first thing we do as humans, we get a bit distressed, we shut down our social world, and then we shut down our exercise and play world. And I encourage my colleagues to expand, get your patients to stop the reversals, stop the avoidances. You were talking about avoidances and some of the people you saw, and do an approach behavior. You described an approach behavior very nicely, going up to people in the street, practicing chatting to people with a dog. You know, you may meet Einstein there one day, walking whatever dog he had, if he had one. Tim, have you got any questions? We've got some questions. It actually looks like it's the Q&A, not the chat box.
Funny thing is, so I actually had a similar question. One of the questions that's in the chat box at the moment about sort of, I mean, I'm hopefully not quite near it yet, but one of the big questions is, I mean, you know, kind of you mentioned the fact that people can become depressed if they've suddenly got nothing to do. And I know my father, when he retired, suddenly became, well, not depressed, but became quite, you know, grumpy for a wee while just because he got a bit bored. I guess the question is, I mean, mostly around succession planning. So, I mean, I'm a partner in my practice. You know, I imagine a number of the sort of the people in the audience are probably, you know, kind of members of GP practices and all those sorts of things. I guess, how do you suggest having those, I mean, apart from just actually doing it, how do you suggest having those conversations, and when do you suggest having that if people are wanting to ease back rather than just go cold turkey and effectively just kind of have a, you know, kind of like, okay, I'm a full partner one day, or I'm a full, you know, kind of partner in a practice one day, and then I'm, you know, kind of, and now I'm retired?
Well, I think that's a very good question, because my experience as a financial advisor is that very few people did this. They might verbalize it, but they don't do anything about it. They don't seriously look at this problem of not being there or easing out of practice. Now, for me, I went to see my doctor, and I was given the news that I had a few days to live. Now, that's a really interesting way to leave work, but it does happen. And it can happen to many people in many different ways. Now, I was lucky because I had a written agreement in place as to how I was going to transfer ownership of my business to my business partners. And it actually took 3.5 minutes for me to pass over a seven-figure business to those people, simply because I had done what you were talking about, Tim. Sitting down and talking to people about what we're going to do and how's it going to work out, and so on and so forth. And you just got to do it. I mean, it seems silly, but that's all you can do is just do it. You know?
Oh, and as the lawyer in the room, write it down.
Yep. Yeah. That's right.
Good advice.
So,
So who's the bill going to, Tim?
It's all right, that one's a freebie.
So we've got some questions here. This is from Teresa. This is great stuff. What about if you're single, have single friends, but you want a group of friends to holiday with, not just single people? Any ideas? Now, this can come from any of you, but Peter, maybe you kick off on that one. You've probably had that one before.
well, I think it's really important that we all understand that like likes like. So people who like football tend to spend time with people who like football. People who drink alcohol tend to be with people who drink alcohol. People who dance tend to be with people who dance, and so on and so forth. So I'd look at your personality and your friendships and the type of person you want to be with, and they're the people that you really have to work on to get involved in doing that type of thing. And not enough people do that. They just think, oh, a group of people. No, it doesn't work that way. It's much better to be far more focused in doing that. And that would be my answer. Has anyone else got a suggestion?
Maury, you're nodding your head there. You got any suggestions?
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with what Peter said. You are surrounded by different groups of friends. And so I guess you generally hang out with them for various reasons and different topics. So I have tried once to mix everybody together at a party. It didn't work out.
It's always surprising that, isn't it? Tim, have you got a comment on that?
Oh, look, in terms of that one, I mean, look, I my holidays these days are basically kind of family time. But I do have a number of friends who are single and, you know, kind of effectively my age. And what they tend to do is they tend to find there are a number of kind of holidays that they tend to go on. So a really good friend of mine is very into cycling. And so he will go on cycling holidays, and often he will go, you know, it'll be an organized group that goes and does cycling around, you know, kind of stupidly high hills. And so, but he'll come back and he will have made sort of 2 or 3 friends that he will then go on future cycling holidays with, or just go and actually go on holidays with them later on. So there are a number of sort of organized groups, and I don't mean sort of the old school, you know, Trafalgar bus tours around, you know, kind of Europe, or cruises that you can go on that are, you know, kind of that will have people that will share your type of interests. And yeah, I mean, you know, it could be diving, it could be whatever it is. I mean, there will be probably, I mean, it's probably unlikely to be helpful if you're just like sitting by a pool near a beach, because, you know, that's just a holiday. But certainly if you have other interests, there may be some sort of holiday groups that cater to those sort of interests.
I mean, organised trips are quite good. I've done quite a few intrepid group tours and invited friends to come along with that. But we did one in China, and we got to know a lovely young Australian couple from New South Wales. They were farmers, and we still just keep in touch every now and again. They've since had a family. They didn't have a family at the time. It was just sort of interesting, quite unexpected that we would have connected. But I still, you know, when something happens in our family, I flick them an email, and they're farming out Wagga Wagga way, you know, and yeah, so you never know who you might bump into and get to know. But it is that thing, I think. I know when I've gone on those groups, I consciously make sure I'm going to be super friendly to everybody. Like, I'm going to talk to everybody in that group, and I'm going to make sure, because I think you can go into a group and decide to make it work and get some sparkle in it. You can become the prime mover. If you're waiting for everybody else, it may never happen, because the energy gets sucked out of the group.
Yep.
Although, yeah, that can sometimes backfire if you've got moderately annoying tendencies like I do. So.
I'm sure I annoy people, but
well, Bruce, we're running out of time. So can I just cover a couple of other important issues, if you wouldn't mind? The first one is addictions. Now, we all have them of some description. It might even be television, but it could be alcohol, or it could be gambling. I mean, take gambling, for example. I mean, you have the largest lottery over there called Powerball, and the cost of the ticket is $1. And the biggest prize was absolutely enormous a few years ago. And people think they're going to win. What happened is that when one person makes $100 million in the prize, that means that every single person for months beforehand has lost money. Some have made little minor prizes, but most people lose money when it comes to gambling. That's an issue. Eating is another addiction that people have. I mean, a chef once told me his greatest fear was that people who buy a McDonald's meal would believe that it's food. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Ross Walker, my doctor friend, talks about carbonated soft drinks, and he says, if ever I'm in charge of the world, I would ban carbonated soft drinks. And he talks about that, and then he finishes up by saying, if you have to have one soft drink a year, I suggest you consider reducing it to nil. It is so bad. Spending and buying are another addiction. Mobile phones, my goodness. If you want something to look at Simon Sinek, that's S-I-N-E-K, Simon Sinek view on a new addiction. Just have a look at that. Smoking is an addiction, medicines are addiction, perfectionism, and so it goes on. But remember that all addiction in time will destroy relationships, it will cost money and time, and it will make your life worse.
I have a colleague at the university who talks about addictions, and he says people have a relationship with their addiction. It's sort of like their best friend, and it's very hard to leave your best friend and give it up because it provides you with company and feeling good and all the things a true friendship would. So I think it's very difficult to leave. It's like leaving your lover. It's very hard to do. So something to think of. Got some questions here, Peter. Any tip? Sorry?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Do you have any tips, this is Hillary, for retirement where one partner is caring most of the time for their partner who is disabled?
Oh, am I commenting on the person disabled or the person who's caring?
Whatever. With the situation, I think Hillary's asking, what would you suggest in that situation? I mean, I guess one thing would be you have to still think of ways of keeping your own life expanded. I would say if that was a patient of mine.
And I think you're right. I think the most important thing is that the carer is involved in a lot of really helpful and useful social contribution, which is one of the keys to a successful retirement. So they've already started doing that wonderful, wonderful task of social contribution. I don't know the degree of contribution that they need to make. If it's a very serious disablement, then I don't know, maybe get some help, maybe, but you've got to have time off. You must get away from that particular way of thinking and the way of acting and get into other things which are of equal excitement in your life to help you expand your mind. Otherwise, you become too narrow in the way that you're thinking.
Absolutely, yeah. A question here about learning a language. What do you think of that?
Oh, brilliant. If you want to improve your mental capacity, language is one of the best things that you can do. Learning another language keeps this thing going. Just as me having to write a paper, an hour-long presentation on cognitive decline, you are doing things that you don't otherwise do. And they're the things that keep the brain going. Now, we often talk about, oh, yes, but I play chess or Sudoku or I do crosswords or bridge or whatever the case may be. The point about that is that if you do those things, I believe they can help. And I've read about it and they can help a little bit. The problem is that every one of those things are a win-lose situation. A win-lose situation. You either get the puzzle out or you don't get it out. My suggestion is to get involved in things where there are no win-lose situations. Learning a language is one. Talking to people is another. You can't win in a conversation with people. You never know. You might be married. You don't know your spouse. You might know a little bit about her or him. You might, but you don't ever know that person. Therefore, relationships is one of the best things that you can do to help the mind develop.
Oh, look, as a lawyer, I wholeheartedly disagree that you cannot win a conversation. But no, like it is great. I mean, talking rubbish is one of my hobbies, to be honest, and kind of that's why I have slightly annoying tendencies. But it's my friends will hopefully think it's an endearing quality, not always, but most of the time. But I think
Not something you do in court, though, Tim, eh?
No, no rubbish talk there at all.
No, it's gone.
So that's fine. Look, I think there was one question in here that sort of said, kind of, and this is possibly, I think, something that we may all be a little bit guilty of, even just generally, and not a requirement question. Can you look too far ahead and sort of try to do too many things? And I think if you spread yourself too thin, you may end up kind of losing some of the benefit of that planning. It may become a bit scattergun. I mean, Peter, what do you think about that?
No, absolutely. I think that, for somebody your age, Tim, to start thinking what you're going to do when you're 96 is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I do believe that you should have short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals. And the really important ones are the short-term goals. But when it comes to retirement, that's a medium-term goal. And that is really critical that you spend a lot of time thinking about it. Not all your time, just a lot of time. And so, yes, I think it's important you don't concentrate on the really big issues of what you're going to do when you're 90. Personally, I mean, I don't think of that. I mean, I'm still trying to find a guy that only put 24 hours in a day. I mean, if I can find that person and get that expanded to maybe 30 hours a day or 40 hours a day, I should be able to finish what I've got to do. So we really have to concentrate on the important issues, but long-term planning is critical in a broad sense.
So Peter, you got my curiosity. Getting up at 5 to 6, is that to limit the amount of time you spend asleep, or is that do you get your normal hours sleep, but you go to bed a little bit earlier? I mean, did you have to learn to deal with sleep deprivation? Could you unpack what your what that was about? Because that sounds pretty intriguing.
Well, it was more about developing the discipline. I mean, I remember when we had children, for example, we never, ever, ever told them that they had to go to bed. Never once. But we insisted what time they would get up. And it didn't take them to work out that they can't stay up till midnight if they're going to get up at 6 o'clock or 5 to 7 or whatever the case may be. Mm. And I think that 5:55 was a discipline that I needed to get involved in. Then I had to deal with the sleep side of things. And sleep is a huge issue in retirement, especially with females, but it's a huge issue that we all have to handle. Sleep deprivation is one of the worst problems that you can have at any time, but particularly in retirement. And I talk to a lot of females in retirement, and they suffer terribly with sleep. They always wake up at 5 to 3 or something like that. That they stay awake for hours. So it's things that we've got to work on. For example, I used to get about 6.5 hours sleep a night. Now I'm up to 7.5 hours of sleep. So I'm working hard on getting better sleep. And so that's how it all started, Bruce.
So you want to start the day early is the bit of getting up at 5 to 6. Is that why you get up then?
Oh, absolutely. When I was at work, it was 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Because that gave me time to be eons in front of my competitors. Mm. And that's how I used to do it. I don't care what anyone else does. That's up to them. But that's what I used to do.
I've got a few questions here. So Roger says, thanks for a great presentation. For New Zealand men, 2 men's groups I found helpful. There's a link there to Essentially Men. I'm not sure we could call something a bloke's night out, Peter. That might be more an Australian prerogative, but it may go down well here. I think I'd be more attracted to, I've been in men's groups, I think I'd be more attracted to a men's group. Just a comment here of, if you're interested in people, you will have no problem in starting any conversation.
I think that's pretty true. Yeah.
One of the things actually, there's a sort of a platform / kind of, it can be an app, I think, called Meetup, which is sort of a global platform, and they're effectively it's sort of very just community led, and it's just an online platform where there is kind of infinite number of niche interest groups, And if you go on there and you've got an interest in, kind of Dalmatians, there probably is likely to be kind of a, a meetup group for Dalmatian owners or something like that. It's really good. So it's using these sort of, kind of, online tools to find people that you can then go and have real world interactions with. So it's actually, it's not too bad if you're looking for things to do and you've got sort of vague interests but don't quite know where to start.
Good idea.
Mary makes the comment, learning a new skill often means you meet new people. Okay, so I'm just moving down the questions here. Home exchange through pertinent websites. You often inherit neighbours and friends at the target destination. Not sure what that is. That's for holidays, I guess.
House swapping, I think.
House what?
Yeah, it's essentially house swapping.
Housewarming.
House swapping.
Swapping.
Sorry.
Swapping.
Oh, house swapping, right. Okay, yeah, no, I got you. Yeah. Well, I know doctors have done that and they've gone to another country and they inherit a practice that's either super busy and the other person comes to one that's super quiet and they find it difficult to make incomes meet. They're working too hard or not working hard enough. So my former accountant had excellent plans similar to Peter by changing work days to 4 days per week, then down to 3 days over 18 months. Both he and work gradually got used to not being at work and learned to fill in his time when he wasn't at work. So I guess that raises the question of gradually coming into retirement rather than sort of the all or nothing thing, Peter.
Well, that's right, and we need to think about that. For example, the name of my business. First of all, I might say people say, "Well, how come you can be talking about this when you haven't retired?" Well, the name of my business is Redefining Retirement, and I think what we all have to sit down and do is to redefine your retirement so that it suits you. Not what your mother did or your father did or the government says or your neighbours are doing or your mates are doing, anything. You must define your retirement so that it is your retirement and nobody's else. Then you negotiate with your partner and other friends and that type of thing to see where it all works out. Now, I'm not saying it's totally selfish. I'm just saying that once you redefine how you want to fill in the next 30 years, just as we did with our careers and our sport and everything like that, then you will find it's a lot easier to have a fabulous retirement.
We've got a question here from Scott on Vancouver Island. He's just had to leave because of the time zone. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning there now. But he joined a men's book club. So a thing for blokes. I'm in a couples book club. My wife's in the couples book club and in a women's book club. But I actually haven't heard of men's book clubs, but that sounds fabulous. I might have to move to Vancouver Island. Workers' edition, many don't retire until it's too late to enjoy retirement.
That's true too. And another thing that you can do is that I have a lot of members in social media, friends in social media. Now, not in Facebook, that's not really serious in my view, but I mean, I belong to LinkedIn, for example, and I have a lot of people in LinkedIn. And every now and again, I contact someone and I just say, "Hey, Tim, interested in what you're doing, just wondering if we could catch up for a coffee." Now, invariably, they say, "Yeah, that's a good idea." And so we have a coffee. And that is a way of expanding your friendships more and more and more. You learn what other people are doing and how they're doing it and that type of thing. And your life becomes a lot more interesting when you're meeting people you don't know. I do that a lot. I talk to everyone on buses and trains and ferries and planes. I always talk to people because I have found that you really do enhance your life if you do that.
Okay, well, we're running out of time here. So I just wonder whether Moru or Tim have any closing remarks, and then we'll just hand over to you for a final shutdown there, Peter. Lots of good comments coming in. So Moru, any final words or
Yes,
what have you got out of tonight?
I have been also reading quite a few Q&A questions that people have been posting and can certainly relate to quite a few. From my experience, that I have seen people and even family members who either have a very relaxed and sometimes, like you described, Peter, could be probably boring or they feel bored type of retirement, or I have seen people who make themselves very busy and to a point which from an outsider's point of view, it's probably almost stressful because they have this sense of urgency for some reason and getting everything done. They give themselves deadlines, or probably in other words, setting up goals, too many of them. And so they just keep going and charging through. So from what we have heard today, and it seems there's got to be a balance probably somebody can find, and we're probably all in the way of searching for that balance.
That's right.
We've got Ian there saying, what's wrong with no goals? Concentrating on the experiential wandering, stopping to smell the flowers rather than focusing on a distant goal. So we've got a Buddhist there, I think, in the present moment. So great stuff, Ian. I like it. I like it.
Nothing wrong with that, as long as it's a focus, as long as it's a decision that that's what you are going to do. Exactly what we're talking about. That doesn't have to be doing what everyone else does. You can actually do things which are entirely different.
Yeah, and that's my thinking as well, is that realistically, everyone is different. Some people might enjoy doing not very much, and what everybody else may think is boring, that may make them happy. I think you've got to try and plan and think about what will make you happy and sort of try and achieve that. Because kind of people may be absolutely happy when they are so busy that other people go, I'm exhausted for you. And I think it's finding your own middle ground and working out what's going to, as long as you can continue doing it, then keep on doing it. But it's just, I think it's about having, my view is that it's about having conversations with people early enough that you can put those things in place. And that's just that, whether it's in your professional capacity, in your personal capacity, or whatever it may be, or with your doctor, in terms of any kind of health issues that you may have to address kind of in the lead up to retirement, or just the lead up to getting to my stage where everything starts hurting and you can't run as well as you used to, and when you try, you break everything. It's just kind of how it works now. So it's just I think just planning ahead and talking to people about it through that is pretty good.
Good.
So Peter, we were going to talk about resources for people. You were going to mention your website, which we can put up. I think Paul's going to add it to the discussion thing. You've got a website that people can go to and work online. You've got some products there?
That's right. And there are various ways in which I can help people. There's the website, which is a pretty standard way for people to get reference information and and there's a lot on the website, a lot of things that I can do. For example, I do individual coaching. So if people are prepared to cut a check, then I'll individually coach them. Now, most people don't want to do that, but the one that interests people the most, and Maru talked about that earlier, is this workshop that I run. It's a 3-hour workshop where people sit down together, 30 people, 35 people, and we talk about retirement. And for the first time in their life, they will walk away with an actual written plan as to how they think they're going to start developing their retirement plans. And they walk away with this plan having discussed many of the issues that are in there. Now, that is a really exciting way to learn about retirement, because you're with other people who've got similar problems. Then, of course, there is the course which I'm developing at the moment. What we're doing is we're presenting a course for people to subscribe to. It's inexpensive. It's $10 a month, $10 a fortnight, and they're going to get, $10 a month, and they're going to get an hour and a half of information every fortnight on all the key aspects of retirement. Now, it will vary completely every fortnight, and so there'll be no great repetition about what's being talked about. For example, We might do a session on, as we talked about today, 11,000 days, and then we'll do something on cybersecurity, and we'll do something on grandparenting, and we'll do something on a health issue, for example. So there are 3 minor topics and 1 major topic in every edition that we're putting out, and that's coming out fortnightly, and we're doing that for $10 a month. But that's the way that we're getting the message across.
And what's the web address, Peter? How do people find you?
The name of the company is Redefining Retirement Proprietary Limited at .com.au, redefiningretirement.com.au. And look, quite frankly, if people want to talk to me, they can send me a message on their phone and I'll call them and we can have a brief chat about the things that are interesting them if it's quite specific. I'm quite happy to do that.
Great. Oh, well, that's very generous of you, Peter. Well, I'd just like to thank Muru on behalf of the engineers and Tim on behalf of the lawyers, and to those of you who have not done a Goodfellow webinar before, and especially to you, Peter, for being willing to come on and talk to us about retirement. It looks like people have really enjoyed it and got lots out of it. And I'm looking forward to hosting you in Auckland, and we can maybe line up a few engineers and lawyers as well as health professionals, so to have the odd glass of wine with. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to the audience.
And thank you very much. I have appreciated the opportunity and I've really enjoyed it too, so that's great.
Okay, well, that's over and out from me. I will shut down the meeting. So good night all, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks, those of you who are regulars for the Goodfellow Unit. Thanks very much.